Okay, episode 4 of Creator Journeys. I'm delighted to be joined today by Jeremy Horowitz. He is a managing partner at Because Ventures, which invests in e-com as well as SaaS companies. And he's also the head creator at Let's Buy a Biz, the fast growing newsletter that I love to read, and I'm sure many people listening as well. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thank you. Thank you. Really excited to be here. Really excited to dive back into the depths of how the creator economy works and how hopefully, it's all big smashing success for all of us. And then thank you for the very kind words.
Awesome, man. Well, most of our previous conversations have been around e-commerce, but we're going to shift gears and talk a little bit about content marketing today, and specifically how you're leveraging your personal brands and how you approach everything from content ideation to generating leads or whatever your objectives are. Because speaking personally, I've seen over the last 12 months, your content has really become extremely well defined, and it just feels as though you know exactly how to hook people in, how to tell a great story. Your format is always on point. So I guess my starting question would be, after creating content right on LinkedIn for probably 5 years now, we've probably been doing this the same
Yeah.
time.
Mm-hmm.
In the last 12 months, you've really went up a gear, and everything in terms of the quality, how you resonate with your audience feels extremely well defined. So just tell me, how did you stumble upon or discover this process to hook people in, really start to scale your audience and drive obviously positive outcomes for your personal brand?
Yeah. So after 4 years of screaming into the void and stumbling in the dark, no, I'm kidding. But yeah, I think it all really comes down to really clearly defining what my audience was and really clearly defining what I wanted to accomplish. And I think I've recently gone back and analyzed my past 5 years of LinkedIn performance. And I take out every single post I've ever done and mark the performance in a spreadsheet. So like how many views, how many likes, how many comments, what type of engagement did every single post I've ever done get. And I categorize them by type of posts. And I have these I have these like pillars of content that then I try to cycle all of my posts through while we experiment with some other stuff. And it was really interesting. There's three really big phases of my LinkedIn content so far since I started posting really consistently in late 2019, early 2020. The first one was promoting the podcast that I was doing at the time called Messenger Mastermind, which was very like ecom tips, tricks, very heavy. Then the second phase was kind of like my B2B SaaS career of being at Dacity and then being at Gorgeous, where I was in very ecosystem heavy roles. So it was very much like, how do we talk to e-commerce merchants, but then also how do we talk to the partner ecosystem, agencies, technologies, everybody who's involved in kind of what I would call the sphere of influence. And a lot of my content was created around that. And so I always like to think of it as what's really, really helpful content that people will actually take away and find value in. Then what's the just entertaining stuff? Like what's the stuff that's just going to get people to stop and to scroll, engage with, enjoy it? And what was really interesting is in the past year and kind of that time frame that you mentioned, I really honed in on, okay, what is the stuff that really gets a lot of engagement, but then also has kind of a back end to it that people are, oh, this is really interesting. And so while I was looking at my content, basically what I found in my content creation that was the most exciting was these fake takeovers and these me pretending to work in M&A teams at big companies. And where that had started from was at Because Ventures, we were starting to pivot from more VC style investments to private equity style investments where we were going to buy companies. And the whole Let's Buy a Biz brand and this whole content creation that I actually started testing on LinkedIn before I built out this brand around it was I actually would take the private equity memos that we would write to our investors and to our financial partners. And, I'm in NDAs up to my neck and I can't actually talk about any of the private deals. But I would take the same structure of the documents we would create there. And I was like, oh, this is probably pretty interesting. And people would would learn a lot because it's something that I don't think a lot of people have access to. And then the second piece is it's like kind of like how can I make this fun and entertaining? And so essentially what Let's Buy a Biz and this whole like kind of what I'm known for now is these fake takeovers of public companies. So, we recently did one about Warby Parker. And, if we were going to take the DTC darling who's done very poorly private, how would that work? How would we how do we then grow the brand, right? Because a lot of what we do is, okay, here's the current financials of a business. If we're going to acquire it, how can we do something called EBITDA expansion, which basically just means how to make the business more profitable, more money. And basically what I'm doing is I'm just creating a fun hypothetical version of that weekly. And then I've now expanded that into multiple categories. So to answer your really question, it was the perfect combination of what was highly engaging on social media to then what actually served the business purpose that I wanted to accomplish. And then in that time frame, I also went full time on the private equity side, which then caused this really interesting shift where the why behind all of this, outside of me just having fun, is it shifted from our existing network of my partner and I, and the newsletter, which I had started building out a little bit at this time frame, was the main source of our actual deal flow. So like people who wanted to sell their business for us to acquire or invest in. What's shifted, I would say, definitely in the past year and a lot more in the past 6 months, is I would say like my network, this kind of like external outside of people we previously worked with, was maybe 10% of our deal flow. Now LinkedIn has generated, and just because like I keep track of it all myself, I would say 80% of our deal flow, either directly or people who have engaged with my LinkedIn content, are partners, other types of people in the space who are now referring deals to us as well. And so it's been this really interesting combination of, okay, what was a big business objective that I was looking to accomplish? What was stuff I saw in the market that was super effective? And then now I'm basically just a vehicle of, hey, here are these fun ideas. And it's also a little bit of thought leadership. Like it's at this stage, a lot of like when someone sells you their business, you kind of become, I always like to call it like the babysitter or the uncle. Like you kind of become the guardian of their very preciously held thing. So it's also a little bit of like KLT, like here's getting to know, like, and trust Jeremy as the potential person who's going to like take over your baby. And it's presented just this really interesting combination of many different things all at once. And then it's just been a fun ride now, reaching millions of people every year through what I find are like my crazy out of the box ideas.
Yeah, that's epic, man. And it's so interesting to hear you talk about that inbound lead flow as well to you personally, because I feel as though there is a bit of a stigma, and it does feel like this sometimes on LinkedIn. It's like marketers speaking to marketers, right?
Yeah.
Like people like myself, for example, clearly trying to sell services. And I think because of that, a lot of CEOs, whether it's SaaS companies, which is not as much friction as they used to be, but even people with different objectives like yourself might have been hesitant to post because they don't want to get involved in that. But you've just clearly illustrated there how it's completely transformed your access to opportunity. And I think this is something that's coming up over and over again. It's you might not want to necessarily directly generate leads, but just posting and making yourself known, you get a huge amount of access to opportunity on LinkedIn.
Yeah, and I think that's a common mistake that everybody makes. And I also did a lot of ghostwriting for when I was at Dasty and Gorgeous for senior execs there. And I think the biggest mistake that everybody makes is that they think it's a one-to-one correlation of people who engage with your posts become your pipeline. And I know you've talked about this as well. What I actually find usually is the most effective are the lurkers. People who I have never seen, like I know of them, but I've never seen them engage with my posts. They never, reach out to me or comment or even like and like support comments like that. But then, out of the blue, I'll get a DM saying, hey, I've been following your stuff for 6 months. I love your content. We should meet. And the really interesting thing, and where I've now, I was never really skeptical of this, but now this is like completely just killed that whole objection for me, is I've actually had investors reach out to me. So we originally started the fund with our own capital plus a couple of family offices and private equity firms that we've worked with before. Just by sharing, this is what I'm working on, this is what we're doing, this is what we're seeing. I've had other people reach out to me and it's like, hey, I want to invest in this as well. And so it's not just the deal flow on the buying side, but there are, everybody would think, oh, there aren't like people with money who are just, spending around time on LinkedIn. LinkedIn has just become YouTube or Instagram or Meta or whatever other channel for this little sliver of the world of billions of people, and probably actually tens of hundreds of millions of billions of people. That it's just their new form of engagement, and I'm guilty of it too. I spend way too much time on LinkedIn, but like I instead of going to like a Meta or X or another social media app, I'm going to LinkedIn first just because it's my like how I think about the world. And there's tons of other business obsessed people who are doing the same thing. And so I think like, if you create highly engaging content, that does get a lot of views. And that's also why I've started to actually, I think views is a vanity metric, but it's actually my core metric that I manage for all of my content, because there is some function of how many people can you reach and what does that impact to your business. Um, and I think, like, especially for organic content, to me, it's the most important, because what I found is you never know what will end up happening by those people that you reach. And there will be no sign up until the moment where they just come and reach out to you that you're having a really building a meaningful impact in that relationship. But the constant, just really, how can you grow that as much as possible, and how can you use your content to go find those people, is why I've really just come in and narrowly focused on that, because it's had such an outsized impact that I would have never, I knew going in. I mean, I've worked in marketing my whole career, so like I know this stuff, but it's really different when you see it come in the pipeline. And, it's like, I've had people from Fortune 500 companies that, would have been a dream client I never worked with before, just like, hey, let's have a 15-minute like catch up and talk. And never had an interaction with those people at all before, and now they're the ones who, it's a very powerful thing for them to come inbound and to start a conversation off in that perspective versus chasing them.
I think that's such a key point to pause on for everyone who's listening. And I know, Jeremy, I've spoken about my personal experience on how my best deals have came from lurkers who've never
Yeah.
commented or engaged with anything. In fact, Magnet Monsters worked with 5 9-figure e-commerce brands, and 4 of them were inbound DMs who said they've been consuming content for over a year but never even liked a post. So I
Yeah.
think it's so important what you've just said for so many people who get frustrated. And there is an element of, yes, some of those vanity metrics do equate to increased reach and visibility, but also for people who don't get those direct engagement right or comments, that there is a huge segment of people who just consume but don't necessarily engage. And I think for a lot of people, they need to have faith sometime in that process, because they quit before a lot of times they're able to get traction or see the results.
Yeah. I mean, I think also it just comes down to a sheer math problem, right? Like, if you just think about it, the numbers vary, but let's just even be generous that 10% of any social network actually creates all the content that the other 90% consume. And my guess is maybe, based on my own experience and just from doing this for a really long time, my guess is maybe 20 to 30% of people are actually actively engaging, liking, commenting, reposting, whatever, with content. And as I just also noticed my own like personal usage on other social apps, like on Instagram, for example, I don't really use anything other than sending stuff to DMs with my like friends and family anyway. Like, there's not a lot of engagement that I do, but I'm sharing a lot of content out that way as well. And I think people like to think that LinkedIn is this magical B2B platform where human behavior is going to be super different and everybody's going to be super professional. And LinkedIn does have their thumb on the scale a little bit there, that they are curating, I think, more than other platforms do. But at the end of the day, like, people are going to do the same behavior in other channels, and it's just going to permeate through. And so I think that's the other thing that I think about it now a lot, is that like a lot of the engagement that I'm looking to drive isn't necessarily from the people that I want to work with. To me, it's two things. It's one, it's a feedback on my comment. Like, it's that old Gary Vee quote that, you don't ever really personally read, you don't read the comments personally, you read the comments to figure out what your feedback is. And then the second point is that there's a proxy between, I think we have reading the tea leaves on the algorithm, figured out some sort of comment threshold to where different view amounts will be. But to me, that's what it really is like, how can I consistently show up in people's algorithm, where, like, it's probably too much of my ego here, but it feels good when people reach out to me. It was like, hey, I read your stuff every morning while I drink my coffee, and it's really great. And like, to me, I feel like that's also trying to, like, every day I work to deserve that spot in someone's day. And I think, like, the thing that you need to think about is, a post that does even 20,000 views you're not going to get 20,000 likes and comments on that. I mean, if you got that many likes and comments, it's going to go viral. But like, I think that's the thing that you need to also just understand, is that it's a math game, is that you're going to get exponentially more people to see your content than people who engage with your content. And so it's easy feedback loop to see, like, it's nice when sometimes the SVP of figs comes and comments on my post, and I'm like, hell yeah. And like, I kind of know, we're kind of like LinkedIn, I'm going to call him a friend, but like, we know each other through LinkedIn, and like, that feels good. But what's more important is like, the 15 or 30 or 50 people who comment on a post, I know that there's probably 17 other people like the SVP from Figs who aren't going to engage with the post at all, but we'll see it, we'll consume it, we'll be like, oh, hey, this was interesting. After probably 10 times of reading my content, they'll be like, oh, that's the guy who says the crazy stuff about ecom. But yeah, it's all just a consistency game, because I think if you're selling anything more than $100, it takes time to make that decision. I think that's the other big insight that a lot of people miss, is that like anything in business, because all business is marketing and sales at this point, like you're not going to change someone's mind on a 10,000, 50,000, we're in the millions of dollars in a transaction. Like, you're not going to change someone's mind in 5 minutes. Like, you have to consistently do it. You have to consistently be in their ear so that they can the whole unaware to aware problem solution set.
Yeah, man, there's so many rabbit holes we could go deeper on in what you've just said, but a couple of things I think are important to call out. On a hunch, I think I agree with you. Probably 10% create, 20% engage, and then there's like that 70%, right, who are probably sharing in the dark social, as Chris Walker would call it, the Slack channels, the DMs.
Sure. Word of mouth.
Yeah, word of mouth. And that's very, very important for people to consider as well, as opposed to solely looking at those direct engagement metrics. And I think coming back to what you said in the beginning, this is so important when you're trying to grow, is just recreate the winners and look at your analytics. What performed well in the past is often a good indicator of what will perform well in the future. And like you said, that's the messaging that your ICP or the audience that you're trying to appeal to really love. So just recreate new angles and formats and speak to those people again in the same way, rather than getting into that rut where you're so frustrated and you're expending so much energy trying to think of new angles when you already might have a winning formula that can perform extremely well again.
Yeah, the one thing I'd add to that also is like, okay, so let's just take Let's Buy a Biz as an example, which is now kind of this whole media brand. But it started off as originally company. I call it the category of content I call it is company analysis. So I basically just throw my idea out there about, hey, this company is doing this, and I think it should be doing that. Then it turned into market takes. Then it turned into M&A ideas, and then it turned into all these other things. But eventually, I figured out like, okay, there is a format and a structure that works, where it's not just the same hook, it's not just the same content, but it's also a formula that now I've also been able to just basically every week now I just take the same formula and write it about a different company. And I think the other important piece there is that like once you find your hit winning content, like the repurpose and reuse is really important. But the other big thing that I found, and this actually comes a lot from like my days managing SEO teams, is like you have your pillar content and you have your related content, and almost like a circle around the core. And what I found is, not every Let's Buy a Biz post is a killer. Some of them, the best one has done 500,000 views. The worst one has probably done 3,000 views. Like, it's a wide range, but the pillar as a whole is strong enough that like it does 1 million views a year for me in content of just doing one of those a week. And so the important piece that I think to like hit on there is like, once you find a winner, it's not just repurposing it, but it's like, what are all the relevant things that you can build upon it? Because most likely you'll hit similar or sometimes even higher by really diving deep into those quick pools. Like, I think a lot of us spend too much time testing and iterating and going like too deep into the long tail, versus every time that I've analyzed this, and especially where social media I know is going to go, because I've watched this happen on Meta, and then on Instagram, and then on X, and then on Twitter, and then on TikTok, is you're just going to have absolute winners and nothingness. Like, it's just going to be like you're going to get very, very low engagement, and a couple things are going to go viral and be insanely successful. And so it's knowing like which pools are deep enough that you can really go fishing in, because then you can dive really deep. And basically, I know if I write about Shopify's quarterly earnings, it's going to do about 20,000 views. And then there are certain posts that now I build off of insights that I find in the earnings calls, because it's like, now that's kind of my thing. That's my shtick on my brand, my personal brand, is I'll post about like some some lesson there, and then some data about the Shopify ecosystem. The data about the Shopify ecosystem sometimes 50 or 70,000 views, and the other ones can do 10 to 12. And so it's not just, just repurposing the same thing over and over again, but now I found this like sphere of related content where that can add up to significantly more than the first hit that I found. And so it's also like I call it the prune and groom system. Like you need to test a whole bunch of stuff, throw a bunch of spaghetti at the wall, prune out everything that doesn't work, and then build up as much as what does. And it takes time. Like to your point earlier, the stuff doesn't. You don't figure you don't figure all this out in a month. This has taken me like probably started 6 months and now years of doing this. But last month I did as many views as I did in all of 2022, and
Mhm.
so like it's really honing in. And like to your compliment earlier in the episode about like how everything's really honed in, it's because I've constantly been tracking these things. I mean, I've probably tested over 60 different content types since I've been doing this. It all has kind of related back to the same core things of like what I'm interested in, but eventually figuring those things out and really going deep into them. And that's what I really changed in the last year is I stopped testing so many things. I even went from like 20 different content types last year to this year I've done 8. And 8 has even been too many. Like really it's 4 that have really driven it and a couple of experiments and tests. And so it's also like really, really drilling down into that 80-20 of what is that really stuff that like, it's a little bit of a personal journey, I guess, of like, what is your ikigai, or like, what is your amazing thing that you are uniquely positioned and interested enough to talk about? But it's testing long enough to figuring that thing out and then going incredibly deep there.
Yeah, I think you've absolutely nailed it. I'm going to come on to two things related to that. The posting format, so how you create the content, what type, as well as the posting velocity to iterate and gather enough data to realize what those winners are. So let's first of all go on to the type of content you create, right? So for anyone listening, you can do video content, you can do written long form content, you can do these short form videos, carousels. I always personally recommend people to just find something that you're really good at and double down on that. And for me, you've just been exceptional at these like medium to long form direct response style, in some ways, copy breakdowns. So tell me a little bit about how you settled on that format. I'm guessing you're going to bring in some of the data and like historical learnings that you've already been over, right? And like that's gave you this identity that when you post, I already know without seeing your name, like that's come from Jeremy.
Yeah. I've tried everything else. So before all this, I ran a podcast for 162 episodes that was audio video. I've tested a bunch of short form. I've tested carousels. I've tested static images, and by far and away, just like for everything that I always measure, the written is the most successful. I think, like if I had to break down why, I would say that usually my topics require context, data, and I think like one of my special skills that people enjoy and like really what I've tried to nail in my content is taking a complex idea and making it simple. Like what's something that's sophisticated or complicated or something that like unless you learned about it, you wouldn't like it's like hard to kind of grasp in a headline. And how do I make that basically the way that I've structured all my posts now is what's a big bold bet that someone can argue with to get like to play the social media game to get someone to engage to actually it's kind of like dessert first so you eat your vegetables. Like what's something that's like provocative enough that will get you to engage, but then breaking down a complex idea in a very simple data driven method that I don't know, it feels like a lot of people care whether they're right or wrong. To me, what's interesting is like, what's the interesting debate around the idea of how we become smarter about this thing? And maybe that's getting a little too meta and a little too high level. That's like, I feel like what my aspiration for all of it is. But it's really hard to accomplish all of those things. Well, let me phrase it this way. I'm not a good enough designer to design a great graphic asset that will represent that. And that actually, I think, is an area that I'm actively expanding into now, is bringing in a designer who can create charts and graphs and other things and like data visualization to make it, with some good copy to make it more obvious. And then from a video perspective, it just comes down to like, we're probably have to launch a podcast again, which then comes down to like the video infrastructure of editors and producers and all those other things. Which will come. But I think I personally really wanted to master the concept of putting my ideas down in words. I think that specific format really forces you to, it's really hard to BS intelligence in written versus I think you can kind of skate around that with some, depending on how you position video and some graphics. And so that was also like a personal thing that I really wanted to master, just like getting great at writing. This is coming from someone who in second grade, my teacher told me that like my teacher wrote a report card and my parents were like, you should be pretty concerned about his English. We're not really sure that he's going to do well in English in life. And I'm a native born American English speaker. Like that's my primary language. So it was also a bit of a challenge for myself of like, could I master this skill set and get really great at writing? Because going back to the point of like where a lot of the Let's Buy a Biz concept, those deal memos are all written. Like I need to master that skill set to essentially make the important like business cases that we need to make for the fund.
Yep, again, you're dropping so much gold here. And I think this is a nice segue actually into the next question, because obviously you've been able to find your zone of genius in terms of how you churn out deliverables. And going back a little bit to, you were able to look at past historical data. One of the things that enable you to realize like, how have I achieved that content market fit, is you have like a very high volume of content to look back on historically and say, this performed well, this didn't, let's double down on this. And I remember speaking to you a few months or weeks ago, and you said the biggest needle mover for you was increasing your post frequency significantly. Tell me a little bit about how frequently you were posting before, how frequently you're posting now, and what type of metrics and correlation you've seen with that increased frequency.
Yeah. So I'll just give like the quick summary of total. When I started at the very beginning, it was completely all over the place and not consistent at all. And it actually just came down to like one of these 30-day challenges where it was something like you got to post every day for 30 days and just get it done. And for everybody who's starting now, if you want to take one piece away, that's the best piece of advice. Don't think about what you're going to post too much. Find 30 things that you think are helpful, post them every single day. What that eventually instilled, and I never really, I didn't post every day after that, but what really instilled is after that, I started posting daily during the weekdays. So Monday to Friday, every day something went out, unless something happened. Did that for a couple of years, started toying around with weekend updates. And it actually just came from me just messing up. Like I would miss posting or scheduling during the week. So I'd be like, okay, we got to get this out over a Saturday, a Sunday. I found a really interesting trend. Senior people or incredibly busy, high performing people are usually more active on LinkedIn over the weekends. And my high level thought there is they're probably too busy, too busy for social media during the week, but it's a business thing that I'm going to do over the weekend of networking and all those other things. So then I started introducing weekend posts, did a bunch of experimentation there. And then starting in March of this year, we moved from, going into March, it was every single day of the week, Sunday to Friday. Then starting in March, we added 2 posts per day. So one in the morning slot, one in the afternoon slot, Sunday to Friday. And it's been a really interesting experiment and challenge. We're still toying around with it. Do we post exactly 2 posts every day? Is there a balance? Because there's a lot of trade-offs to that. So first is just like pure volume. Like it's been an incredible learning curve where essentially I had like my steady state content in the morning and then experiments went in the afternoon. And that was an interesting way. Like we were able to learn a lot faster while maintaining core performance of these things hit. We're testing that now back a little bit today. What I will say is that when you post 2 things in a day, your first post, if it will go viral, doesn't perform as well. And so what I found is that there is some sort of rate limit that LinkedIn is putting on everybody. And I would assume this is every social platform, but everything that comes out of Jeremy's profile, there's a certain amount of juice that they'll give it. And the more shots you take, the more you're using up your juice. And so what we started toying around with is testing and stuff that we don't, in days that putting 2 posts a day in days that we don't think is performing as well. And I'm in the middle of this test right now. So this could work. This could be a complete failure. We go back to 2 days test. We go back to 1 day. We're still figuring it all out. But what I will say is right now what we're doing is kind of letting our best posts breathe. So 1 day per post for the stuff that we are very, very confident in, those core pillars that we know will do pretty well. And then, putting 2 posts a day in the stuff that we don't think is going as well. We've also thought about completely changing it and, putting as many posts in the days that perform as best as possible to see if we can, just rile up as much engagement as possible. Because there is some sort of signal there where, when you're hot, LinkedIn keeps passing you the ball to shoot more. And so we're experimenting with all of this now. And candidly, I think they change this stuff every quarter. But the one thing that I will say is, right, it's also just a pure numbers game. If you post twice as much and your content is as good, that's the big challenge. Like, can you double your out? That was a really hard thing for us to do. Is like, can I double my output and the content quality be as good consistently? If you can cross that hurdle, then if your average post does 5,000 views, then you can expect on a 5-day a week cadence 25,000 views. If you can do double, you're at 50,000. And so it's kind of one of those functions of like, can we consistently post as much as possible? I've just seen this on every single other social platform. Organic will continue to decline over time, which means that you need to increase your volume to then hit a consistent view. And definitely over the past 5 years, I've noticed that like, stuff that would get 20, 50, 100,000 views a couple years ago is getting 12, 15, and 20 now. But that being said, the increased volume was definitely a big needle mover where, we started doubling and tripling performances from previous months.
Yeah, fascinating. Again, a lot to unpack there. I think what you said at the beginning, especially if someone is new to posting, right? Like, don't even think about, is this going to perform or not? You just need to build the habit of turning up every day and just throwing darts. And it doesn't matter if they all miss, because you're not even trying to at that point. You're just trying to get into the consistent rhythm of being disciplined to post. And then on the days, like you said, where you're backing up some posts that might not be performing well, are you keeping like a content repository? Because the way you described it just then is that it's a bit of a like natural flow state for you. You wake up, I assume maybe you have an allocation of time where you create, probably drawing from some type of repository of ideas. But then are you going in later on and saying, whoa, well, actually, and I do this sometimes myself, like this has performed quite bad. Like I'm going to back this up and try and salvage some reach for the day. Yeah, tell me about like that repository if you have one.
Yeah, so I do. So this has gotten pretty sophisticated over the years. It did not start here at all. So for anybody who's just starting out and is like, what is this guy doing? Like, I built this brick by brick over 5 years. Now what I do today is Slack has an auto transcribe feature. So I basically have a Slack channel with my team in it, and I should also probably go into that a little bit. So I have a VA who just helps me generally with stuff, kind of like, think of an executive assistant, like he's just helping me plug a bunch of holes across a bunch of different things. And then I brought on an editor recently who I wouldn't consider, like, I don't have a ghostwriter. All the stuff's my ideas, all the stuff's my thoughts. But when stuff consistently went out with such bad grammar mistakes that I didn't even understand what I was trying to say, I was like, okay, it's time for some help. So the process is there's a Google Doc of just a running backlog. So any ideas, any inspiration, stuff that we think is cool, all gets dumped in there. I record a voice note into Slack. Slack has this amazing auto transcription feature. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. The VA takes it out of Slack into that Google Doc, and then usually it's some back and forth of either I'm cleaning it up, it goes to the editor and then comes back to me, or it just goes to the editor and comes back to me. So we clean it all up, get it ready. And then now what we actually do is my editor and I, because he's like really got my tone down after probably a year and a half of this, is we'll actually rework all of the hooks for the whole week and then grade it. So we have basically a scale of 1 to 10. 1 is why are we posting this? This is not going to do well at all. 10 is this thing's going viral. And actually every single week now we grade every single post, and we basically are trying to, this is like brand new for us. We're basically trying to predict performance. Like, how well can this stuff do? And do we know what will do well in the algorithm and what won't? And then I literally I'm reprioritizing the entire week based on our scores. We haven't gotten enough data back to figure out whether this is a good or a complete waste of time yet. But really what I'm trying to figure out is, because this is probably helpful for everybody starting out. I'm 5 years into this. I've done probably close to 1,500 posts, collectively almost 10 million views of my content. I still don't know what performs well. I'm still, I have a lot of data to make an educated guess, but and if any content creator tells you that they know perfectly, they're also lying to you, because LinkedIn constantly is moving the ball here. But I'm making an educated guess every single day that we post. And so really what I'm just trying to do is figure out, like, can we become good guessers based on our experience of what will work and what won't? And then, like, I'm not sitting in, I do spend way too much time in LinkedIn every day, but essentially what we're doing now is we're taking those whole posts and scheduling them out throughout the week so that it's consistent, because, I think I post at 6:50 and 2:30 every day. Like, I've got no offense, everybody, but I've got a lot of stuff going on. I can't be sitting in LinkedIn at those exact moments in time, push and go. And so LinkedIn has a okay, not great scheduling feature, but we basically are planning the whole week out, and then every week we basically go back and say, okay, what hit our expectations, what missed our expectations, where should we dive deeper into, where should we pull back? And this could be at an individual post level, it could be at an individual hook level, it could be at like literally a couple of words at a hook level, and it could also be like we've killed entire. There was one thing I think I've done 100 posts in this content pillar that we just decided to kill because it was like, this isn't working at scale. Actually, this is a great example. Nobody wants to hear me give tactical advice. So I'm going to give it to you as much of this podcast as possible. I post some insane thing like Salesforce Commerce Cloud is going to die. That does 70,000 views. I post the best insight, my most tactical, helpful stuff I've ever posted before. It gets like 10 likes and 5 comments, like 3,000 views. And so I think that's the other thing of like, just the data keeps me honest of it's not just stuff that I want to post. It's actually helpful stuff that people want to see and want to engage with. And so I think like it's very robust, but to your point, like, and that's why I think the 30-day challenge is just good advice. Like, you just need to throw stuff up at the wall and see what sticks. Because I think the big evolution for me, and especially I literally started on LinkedIn to promote a podcast that was all about super in the weeds tactical marketing tips. And like now it's like funny to think about because it was such a waste of time, because like now that I have enough data to see, nobody cares about what I think about that stuff. And it's not the content that's right for me and for my personal brand and like what it's ironically become. And so, yeah, I think it's so important to just like always have some sort of feedback loop there with consistency, so you don't have to guess of, oh, is this because we didn't post for 2 days last week? Or, I can be honest, like this content was not what people wanted to see, and I need to change my strategy accordingly.
Yep, excellent insights again, like touching on so many important things that we're going to come back to at the end as well in regards to new advice for people starting out. I know we've covered a lot, but there's a few specifics I think we should go a little bit deeper on. But going on to adjacent to your LinkedIn content and your daily posting, you also have your newsletter. Now, I
Yep.
know now your newsletter lives on LinkedIn and you had it set up. Was it Beehive or another type of software in the beginning?
Beehive. It's on Beehive. It's on Beehive as well.
Got it. Got it. So you're publishing on both places, right? Correct? Are you just duplicating
Yeah.
what you already put in the newsletter?
Same exact content goes out to both audiences at roughly the same time every week.
Tell me about your full process behind doing that, because I've recently started doing the same thing with a separate newsletter that I've started for this new business. And my theory, and I'd be keen to hear if it's the same for you, was I have to meet the consumer of the content where they are. So I'm
Yeah.
just going to distribute it on LinkedIn. However, the pushback to that, and I'm sure a lot of people have this when they consider the importance, right, of this like owned audience, is I want to make my newsletter somehow exclusive and incentivize people to follow me and build an asset that I own off these social channels. And something's made me really think about this morning, because last night I was banned from LinkedIn for having an
Oof.
emoji in my name, which I had to change. So this has made me really reconsider. And I've also seen my follow accounts literally be halved overnight. And after contacting them, they said they don't know whether this is going to come back. Anyway, long story short, it's made me really think about building assets again off these social channels. And I know nothing is sort of indestructible, but yeah, just tell me, like, what's your strategy to promote the newsletter, get subscribers? And are you also sometimes in this conflict of whether I should publish it on LinkedIn, migrate people to the website? Give me like a whole 360 overview on how it's currently set up.
Yeah. So I think about the LinkedIn newsletter as straight up content syndication. So to me, and you're an email master, people are going to sign up for the newsletter for all the add-ons and the goodies. So there's a ton of lead magnets if you want to subscribe to my newsletter on our website and to subscribe to Beehive. Also, no offense to LinkedIn, but their CMS sucks. Like, my Beehive newsletter is highly engaging. I put a lot of fun GIFs in. I know that I'm talking about like sometimes it's 2,800. It's almost every episode's almost 2,800 to 3,000 words. Like, I know it's pretty dense financial topics, So I try to make it very live, very fun, very engaging on Beehive. And then, yeah, like I have a bunch of P&L templates. I have a bunch of other resources that people can sign up for. To me, that's the real differentiator. Why I'm going deep there, and yes, it's one of these interesting like growth things that I've just learned about over time, is I need to become more dependent on the thing that I'm trying to become less dependent on. And it's a very like counterintuitive paradox, but two main reasons. One is I've noticed as I like just manually went through a lot of my LinkedIn newsletter subscribers, is it's not people who are on my Beehive subscribers. So it's not people who are doubling up. It's people who I at least believe are sampling or trialing the newsletter before they make the effort to move off of LinkedIn and let me invade their inbox versus their feed. Is one. Actually, it's three reasons. The second one is LinkedIn's just giving an algorithm preference right now. So right, carousels were hot. We all did carousels. Short form video is supposed to be the next thing that's hot, so we'll all move to videos. Newsletters right now are hot and they're prioritizing it, and so there's like a benefit to that I also find very important. And then the third is just the 80-20 rule. Like, it's the insanity of entrepreneurship, but if something is working, put all your chips into the thing that's working. And then while I'm doing that, I'm also heavily investing in a website. I'm heavily investing in a lot of other different, I eventually, like, I've been talking about this for 2 years. I'm eventually going to also migrate all my content over to Twitter. Like, you eventually I need to just invest in the scale to become dependent. But like, I'm also not going to cut off my nose to spite my face.
Yep. So interesting. This actually, again, is another segue. I feel like we're just naturally flowing into each topic here, into my next question. And if we could go a little bit deeper on monetization opportunities around personal brand, content creation, because it's obvious, right, that you take this very, very serious, but you've got a lot of other things going on, as I'm sure most other people do. Managing business, deliverables, whatever, like looking for opportunity. How are you thinking of, let's not even say LinkedIn, let's say like personal brands or content creation as a monetization vehicle and opportunity vehicle for you in the future? What are your like overarching goals in creating? And also, what do you think you can use to monetize it in the future? And if you're already thinking about that, which I'm sure you are you investing in anything like digital assets, courses, etc.? Would love to know a little bit more around your thought process and systems.
Yeah, I've in the past went way too deep in the research on here. So I'll just give the like high level TLDR on kind of how I've structured everything today. So the beauty of media is all media sponsorable. So you can sponsor posts, you can sponsor newsletters, you can do integrated ads with partners. I basically am doing some variant of all of those things right now. Because the dirty little secret that nobody wants to tell you is all the tools and team and all the things I have invested in this cost money. And while I am doing this as a business expense, I also am obsessed with the concept of negative CAC, which is probably a whole other conversation. To anybody who wants to create a business value for creating a personal brand, negative CAC actually is my best answer. I can spend 25 minutes going into all the depth. Negative CAC, and I worked for a brand where Kim Kardashian was the influencer. We sold phone cases, so like eCommerce. The power of someone being able to drive their own traffic and not spending marketing dollars or partnership dollars or sales dollars to build a pipeline is the ultimate value here. So if you want to build, one thing I never understood where people say, I don't have time to post on LinkedIn and X or any social platform. I'm sure people are building good B2B businesses on Instagram. It's your pipeline. Like, you want to make more money, you want to make more sales. Like, you can, anything that you want to put on the back end of that, for free in air quotes, because I am spending some money, but like I've looked at 150 deals in the past year. I don't know, ballpark it, 90 to 100 of them came from my LinkedIn. So I spent $0 in theory to drive a ton of pipeline. Now, so like for us, the big monetization vehicle is the private equity fund. Like, if everything works out in this field, you tend to make a lot of money, build a lot of assets. But, people could monetize it in, 16 different ways to Sunday. Like, once you control someone's attention, I think this is an important part. This actually might be an important part to dig a little bit deeper into. Actually creating quality content that influences people's decision allows you to put any monetization vehicle behind it that you want. Like if you regurgitate and just put a bunch of crap out there that's just recycling and AI content, like that won't move a lot of people to do what you want to do. But that's what I find with like all the people who reach out who want to sponsor my content, all the partners, is like, hey, I really value your content. Where now people are even asking to reach out to like do equity swaps for advisory in their me to advise their business. And I've taken a couple of them. And like I think that's the thing is like, you know, once you like learn about business, you realize that you can monetize everything 60,000 ways to Sunday. What's really important is creating the audience yourself and just investing your time, which yes has some sort of costs, but you know, well, actually, if you have a big budget, you can just pay a team to do it. I've also been part of that in the past. But really having that, like, yes, you can provide services. Yes, you can provide investment, right? Like that's where Hormozy is kind of like probably the bet, and Cody Sanchez are like best examples of we're building an audience for investment, right? Like you built your whole services business off of this. I know people who are doing 17 other types of businesses off of this as well. E-com founders that are running ads now through their social profiles, driving back to their e-com sales. Like you can monetize it any way you want. I think like really more figuring out like what is your business? It's just marketing. What is your business? How do you get people to that business? And then, you know, you'll test enough to figure out how to make the most optimal profit dollar off of that as possible.
Absolutely innumerable ways to leverage it as long as you're proactively building it. And I love that concept of negative CAC, mate. Powerful.
Yeah.
Definitely going to get some post-show snippets of that one. That's something nobody said, but I think is so powerful and such a strong reason to invest, because this is a compounding game that over time just accumulates in that type of scenario playing out. And like you said, that access to opportunity, coming back to that, you only get that from being consistent. And that's actually going to take us onto the final point. And we've dropped a lot of gems here on what people should be doing to get started. But let's say B2B owner, founder comes to you tomorrow. Give me in like 60 to 120 seconds your advice for creating and just getting started posting, let's say on LinkedIn specifically.
Yeah. 30-day challenge, break down every conversation you've had more than once. What is the helpful insight that you constantly repeat yourself over? And I've done this now over 5 years, a innumerable amount of times. Just post 30 days of that stuff. You'll figure out what does work. You figure out what doesn't work. And then, you know, create a simple spreadsheet. This was the type of content I was talking about. Export it, dump it, pay for a tool, whatever you want to do. Just look at all the performance. Stack rank it. What's your top 10%? What's your bottom 10%? Top 10%, invest everything into that, kill everything else. And then usually in that like 20 to 50th percentile, there's something that's a good idea that you just missed on. And so usually you can come back and visit that stuff later. That like if I've done like if I had to start over again, which I have, that's what I do every single time. And it's incredibly effective because it quickly teaches you what to focus on and what to invest in. And, you know, I've seen stuff where off of the first post people book a demo in or a deal. I've seen stuff where, you know, it takes 60 days to get going and then it really picks up momentum. But just having that really quick feedback learning of breaking down what you think is important and interesting and what the audience thinks is important and interesting is the most important skill set here.
Yep, absolutely. Consistency and discipline to get started. And then critically, I think it's so important to just iterate on what the data is telling you. And I've been guilty of this. You've clearly made it clear that you've been guilty. I see other people just end up going off in different directions and frustrated because sometimes the answer's staring them in the face and they're just not looking deep enough to focus and double down on that.
Yeah. And every time that you do that, your greatest frustration is you just didn't make that decision that you knew you had to make earlier.
100%. Well, mate, it's been a pleasure. And obviously, let's finish on the quick plugs. The newsletter, we want everyone to subscribe. Tell us how to.
Yeah, sure. So easiest way to find all of my content is just LinkedIn, Jeremy Horowitz, Horowitz. And then the best place to find all of my content, I'm kind of just building out a repository of everything I've built plus everything I'm learning, is letsbuyabiz.xyz, biz with a Z as well. Those would be the two best places to find me.
Epic, mate. Thank you very much for your time. This has been great and really appreciate it.
Likewise, always have fun, Adam.
Cheers, man.